Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we are going to wrap up our background replacement by compositing our rotoscoped actor and our Unreal Engine background together in After Effects into a single shot. In the process, we will apply several effects to help make our footage look more cohesive before we render out our finalized shot. So jumping back into my After Effects project, I've removed all my layers except for the layer that my actor is on. So next I want to import my image sequence from my Unreal Engine background that I rendered in the last video. So to do that, I'm going to go over to the project window, right click, go to import, file, and then I'm going to select the first frame in my image sequence, and I'm going to make sure that PNG sequence is checked before hitting import. Next, I'm going to grab that background that I just imported and drag it into my timeline. And as you may notice, there's actually a difference in the length of my clips, even though they should be the same length. This is because After Effects has automatically interpreted my image sequence as a frame rate that is not consistent with the frame rate of the original footage. So to remedy this, I'm going to go up to my background, I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to go to Interpret Footage, Main. And from here, I can enter in a new frame rate. So I know that my original footage was 24 frames per second, so I'm going to input 24 and hit OK. And all I need to do is drag out the length of the background, and now they match up perfectly. And then just for the sake of comparison, I'm going to grab my original footage and add it back into my timeline. So that way I can hide my Unreal background just to see what the original background looked like. So by setting up so that I can see the differences in the two backgrounds, that'll help me know what to do to make my actor look a little bit more like he fits in the new background. So now with all that set up, I'm going to go back in with my rotobrush tool to really refine my masking of this actor. Whereas before I just wanted to see how he looked roughly in the environment when I was working on Unreal, now I want to work towards my finalized masking. So to continue my rotoscoping, I'm going to double click the layer that I isolated my actor on. So my goal here is to go in and make sure all these little bits of the old background are gone from my rotoscope. So a large part of this refinement process is just going through and finding all these little flaws that usually appear in the corners and just making sure that the background is completely masked out from those spots. If you've been using motion blur for your rotoscoping, then it's a good idea to turn on the high quality setting if you haven't already. You'll likely have to redo some of the parts with really intense motion blur, but it's well worth it. My cowboy didn't really have any problem areas that would be appropriate for using this next tool on, so I've gone ahead and started up a new project really quickly so that I can show you what to do about finely detailed areas like loose strands of hair. You can see right at the top of this woman's head, there's some hair here that would be really tedious if not impossible to perfectly mat out using the rotobrush tool. So for an area like this, we want to go over it again with the Refine Edge tool. To access the Refine Edge tool, click and hold on the Rotobrush tool to bring down this drop-down menu, and then select Refine Edge from the drop-down. Then make sure to go to your first frame, and if you hold Control and click, you can change your brush size, and then go ahead and paint in that area with all of the loose details. Once you're done, you can hit spacebar to let After Effects go through frame by frame and calculate the masking based on your brush. It'll probably be a little slow, but just give it time and it'll work out. Once it's done, go ahead and click up here to go back to your composition, and you can see the results of the Refine Brush tool. It's still not 100% perfect, but if you were to put this over a background, you would hardly see any of the flaws. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and create a new solid. I'm just going to go ahead and make this one green. And I'll move that underneath my actress layer. And against a different colored background, you can hardly tell where the flaws are. If this was against Unreal footage or live footage, this would be even less noticeable since it would be masked by all the details of the background. Once you've finished refining your rotoscope, be sure to hit the button labeled Freeze, which is located right here. This will lock your rotoscoping work in place and prevent After Effects from trying to make any automatic adjustments. If when you go to render your shot and the rotoscoping looks different from how it appeared in After Effects, it's likely because you forgot to press the freeze button first. Now that we're done with rotoscoping, let's experiment with some effects from the Effects and Presets dropdown on the right to add some final polish. The first thing I want to do is make a slight adjustment to my actor's matte using an effect. So I'm going to go down here to Matte. I'm going to select Matte Choker. And I'm going to drag that onto my actor layer. And what Matte Choker does is it allows me to expand or contract the border of the current matte as well as make that border softer, both in terms of the geometric shape of the matte as well as the edges of the matte. So with the Matte Choker, I can trim the edges of my actor all the way around and knock out any leftover bits of the background that I might have missed from the rotoscoping. Next, I want to get into some color correction. So I'm going to go over here to the color correction drop down, and there's a lot of effects here. A lot of them are very similar to some of the adjustment layers that you would find in Photoshop. And the one I want to start with is Change to Color. And what Change to Color does is it allows me to use the eyedropper tool right here to select a color on one part of my scene, and then it lets me select another color to replace the first selected color with. So the color I want to be my replacement color is going to be this rock face back here. And my goal here is still to try and remove that remaining background color from the edges of his hands here. So I'm actually going to go ahead and turn off the visibility of my rotoscope effect on this layer. And then I'm going to use the Change to Color eyedropper tool to select a color of the sky. And now as you can see, a significant amount of that blue has been replaced with the color of that rock wall in the background. Next up we have Tint, which I'll drag over just the same as the other effects. And Tint is a little bit similar to Change to Color, but Tint will change all of the colors on my selected layer to the two colors that I select as the color that I want to replace all of my darks with and the color I want to replace all my lights with. So here I've chosen a dark and light color from the rocks behind my actor to then replace the colors of my actor's layer. And then I can change the amount at which it actually changes to those colors. So it only does a light tint rather than completely changing the colors of my layer. That way it looks like he's receiving the reflected light off of all of the rocks around him, but he's not literally the color of all the rocks. Next up we have Grain, which can be found under the Noise and Grain category. Grain is exactly what it sounds like. It adds a film grain effect to your layer. And I'm actually going to add this effect to my Unreal background layer. By default, there is no film grain effect in the Unreal camera, which doesn't mesh well when we are compositing with real life footage, because real cameras do have film grain. So we end up with a situation where some of the elements in our scene do have a grain, but Unreal doesn't unless we add it in ourselves. So when I added this effect to the layer, it gave me a little preview box, but right now the preview is hiding behind my actor. So I'm going to move the preview to right here. And if you get real close and look in the box, you can see that there's a film grain effect being applied, especially in the darker areas of the shot. And then if I go back to my effects panel, I can adjust the width and height of that preview box. And also you can adjust the intensity of your grain, or the size, or the softness, or the aspect ratio. You wouldn't want to do anything crazy with those values, however, as you want your grain to blend in as much as possible. And then we can go down here to channel intensities to adjust the red, green, and blue intensities within your grain. You'll find with film grain that there's usually a slight color bias to the grain. So if you have a really keen eye, you can adjust your artificial grain to match the colors of your real film grain. Once you're done with the preview box and you're ready to see it on the whole layer, go up here to viewing mode and select final output, and that will display the grain on your entire layer. Moving back into color correction, next I'm going to apply a levels effect to my actor layer. And what I can do with this slider here is I can use it to make my darks darker and my lights lighter, thereby increasing the contrast of my actor so that he stands out a bit more against the background. This is especially useful since after doing all this color correcting, now he's starting to blend in because he is borrowing some of the same colors as that background. For my next effect, I'm going to need to make an adjustment layer. To do that, I'm going to right click on the right side of my timeline. I'm going to go to New, Adjustment Layer. And then going back over to Effects, I'm going to go under Stylize, and I'm going to find Vignette and drag it onto my adjustment layer. And all that does is create a dark vignette around my frame, which feels a bit like an older film. This effect is totally a stylistic choice, but I think it's fun. Now, if I were to move this adjustment layer below my actor layer, then the actor will appear in front of the vignette. So the adjustment layer affects all of the layers below it. And then the last thing I'll do is I will add a glow effect to my actor layer. However, my intent is not to make it look like he's glowing. Instead, I will use this to darken the edges around him just a little bit so that he pops from the background just slightly. So first I'm going to change glow based on from color channels to alpha channel so that the glow is coming off of the edges of him rather than intensifying based on where the brightest color is. Next, I'm going to go down to color A. I'm going to select a dark part of my background. And then I'm going to go up to glow threshold and glow radius and turn both of those up. And then under composite original, I believe I will turn that to on top, just so it feels like the effect is blending a bit better with the actor. And from here, I'm just going to keep playing with glow threshold, radius, and intensity until I get a look that feels subtle, but just noticeable enough to make my actor pop. You may find with using this glow effect, though, is that it will make certain errors in your rotoscoping really stand out. So, for example, here's a couple frames right here where there is still plenty of background left over. So I'll have to go back and fix these in the rotoscoping. Once you're happy with how your shots came out, go ahead and go to File, Export, Add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. Then once you're in Adobe Media Encoder, go ahead and drag one of these prefabs into your prefab column. I'm going to go ahead and use the YouTube 1080p one. And then click over here to give your project a destination and a name. I'm going to call mine Cowboy Final. And then once you're ready, go ahead and hit the green arrow to start rendering. And it's a short clip, so it'll only take a second. And there you have it. There's our final composited shot. The effects I've shown here are not the only way to composite a shot like this. These are just some examples to get you started. Feel free to experiment on your own from here, as there's a lot to discover in After Effects. And with that, I hope you make some really cool background replacements, and I hope you have a good day.